So today we are going to focus on this super cool area of psychology called sensation and perception. Let me click on this and let it start queuing up. Okay. This does not have bad words in it, but, you know, it's meant to hint at bad words. I don't think it should terribly offend anybody's sensibilities, but just FYI.
Shit my pants. Right here? Shit my pants, you're kidding.
You can ship your pants right here.
You hear that? I can ship my pants for free.
Oh, I can just ship my pants.
Yeah, ship your pants. Billy, you can ship your pants too.
I can't wait to ship my pants, Dad.
I just ship my pants, and it's very convenient.
Very convenient.
I just ship my drawers.
I just shipped my nightie.
I just shipped the bed.
If you can't find what you're looking for in store, we'll find it at Kmart.com right now and ship it to you for free. Ship my pants.
Oh, sorry.
Right here? Ship my pants, you're kidding.
I didn't realize it would continue. Okay. So what we're going to be looking at today and next time are the physical, primarily psychological, though, processes of what allows us to translate one particular stimulus, where they are actually saying ship, of course, but to interpret it in a very different way that makes us view this commercial as funny. Yes, it did actually air, but because Americans are kind of wimps, it got pulled from the airwaves shortly thereafter, so that's kind of a bummer. So now the only place you can see it is on YouTube, but yeah, it's good times. So we're going to be looking at how we take this stimulus, a particular word, and how we interpret it in a very different way based on the context. Here's an overview of where we're going to go with this unit, this chapter on sensation and perception. If it helps you to write down structural stuff, go ahead and write this down. If you don't care about structural stuff, you don't have to write it down. So we're going to talk about an overview of sensation and perception, basically what are they and how do they work together. We're going to have to talk about two processes that work together, this idea of top-down processing, sort of like an executive saying, hey, you do this, you do that, versus bottom-up processing where you're working a little piece at a time and you're building up an entire framework. Hopefully we should have time to talk about perceptual organization and this idea of Gestalt psychology, how we take a lot of different information that may not necessarily go together and put it together and understand the world around us. We will talk about vision and some processes related to visual interpretation, and we'll talk about hearing as well. I will point out two things. Number one, there is a bunch of other sensory-related stuff that the book talks about that we are not going to talk about in class. So all the stuff about psychophysics and pretty much all of the biological stuff, the sensory side of things, we are not going to do in class. This is my big red flag waving at you to say, hey, make sure you are reading that stuff and getting that stuff very well and very thoroughly, because we are not going to go over that in class. You are still on the hook for it because it is in your textbook. So make sure that you are getting that stuff very well. Okay, what are sensation and perception? Well, in a nutshell, they are two processes that go together to help us understand the world around us. Sensation is the biological process, the physiological, biological process of responding to stimuli in the environment. The biological or physiological process of responding to stimuli in your environment. A lot of the time, sensation is thought of as bottom-up processing. I'll talk about that in just a moment. But when we say sensation, we typically are talking about things like rays of light coming in and stimulating the retina and producing a physical, electrical sensation that then travels to your occipital lobe for processing. Or it might include the tactile stimulation when you reach out and touch something or something touches you, or the olfactory sensations that are produced when you smell something, or the auditory signals that come in and hit your hammer and your anvil and your stirrup and your eardrum, and they cause the cochlea the cilia within the cochlea to move, and that translates into a neural sensation that gets processed in your brain. When I say sensation, I'm talking about the biological aspect of it. On the other hand, when I talk about perception, I'm talking about interpretation. Perception is how we recognize, organize, and interpret that sensory information. How do I recognize, organize, and interpret sensory information? These go hand in hand, right? In order to have something to interpret, in order to do perception, you have to have sensation. You have to sense stuff in order for you to do something with that stuff. So we cannot do sensation without perception. We cannot do perception without sensation. Basically, here's how it works. You're driving along, and there is this stimulus out there in the world. Okay? There's this visual stimulus out there in the world. What happens during sensation, in a very small nutshell, again, your book has a big chunk on it, and we're not going to talk much about it in class, is there's a physical stimulus out there. Photons of light bounce off of that stimulus right there. They're moving at a particular wavelength. They hit your retina, and they activate cells at the back of your eye. Okay, so that's step one. Number two is you have a physiological response. The neurons at the back of your eye are activated. It creates an electrical signal that goes through your optic nerve into your occipital lobe. Okay, we're still talking about sensation here. You then have a sensory experience. Your brain says, oh, hey, look, there's a particular wavelength. Oh, hey, look, I see some other colors in here. And the brain says, oh, look, they're oriented in a particular way. This thing is straight. All right, these things over here are round. You still don't have meaning yet. But what you're doing is you're building what's called a bottom-up framework. It's basically like if you take a brick and you're going to build a house, right? You take a brick, you set it down. Another brick, another brick, another brick, another brick. You're building up from the bottom this house. And the house is not complete until you have all of these individual bricks in place. That's the idea of bottom-up processing or sensation. I have to take in all of these individual disparate pieces of information and put them together to mean something. As you're driving along, you probably are not saying, oh my, look, there is a thing. It has the color that has a particular wavelength. It has some other colors that are a different wavelength and some shapes. If you did that, you would blast right through that stop sign. Right? So what we do, what we realize at a conscious level, is only the perceptual side of things. Oh, that's a stop sign. As a result of perceiving this whole entire thing holistically, it is a stop sign, I know what to do, you then take your foot off the gas, put your foot on the brake, and you come to a stop. Or a rolling stop, or whatever, right? That's the basic difference. We're going to build it up piece by piece, that sensation. I look at the whole thing and I say, oh, I recognize what that is. That's perception. That's what we're talking about here. I want to do a couple of demonstrations to talk about, to sort of show you what sensation is versus perception. So I'm going to show you, there we go, a little key here, and I want you to translate what it says in that red box. So write it down on your notes and figure out what it says. Okay, what does it say? Pencil. Yep, right. Easy enough. Right, so what's the process that you do? Well, you're doing some bottom-up, right, because you're saying, okay, I see up here a shape. It has a black square, it has a white square and a black square outside of that and a white square outside of that. And then you look at these symbols down here and you see what seems to be similar to it. You'd say, okay, well, let's see. Is it this one? That kind of is a, you know, a black square, white square, on top of each other? Well, no, that isn't quite right. You're sort of doing this comparison and saying, is it more like this one? Is it more like that one? Okay, eventually you say, okay, that one looks like the letter P. I'm going to write down a P on my piece of paper. Then you say, okay, the next letter is this sort of M thing with a little arrow on the end. Okay, let's see, is it that one? No, it's not quite that. Oh, yeah, it must be that one. All right, so you're going through that process, looking at the P, okay, looking at the E. How many people had to translate all 6 letters before they knew what the word was? Or did you just say, it starts with P-E-N-C, I'm pretty sure it's the word pencil? Yeah, you mostly did that second process, right. So when you are doing this very initial sort of feature matching the features of these things up in the red box to the features of the key down below, you're very carefully processing and using these bottom-up processes. You're saying, does this feature match that feature? Yes! But at the point at which you say P-E-N-C, oh, I know that must be the word pencil, that's a top-down process. I don't know about you, but I can't think of any other words in English, at least not very common words, that start with P-E-N-C other than the word pencil. All right, so we jump to that conclusion. Now, I could have tricked you, right? I could have said it's actually P-E-N-C-I-J, ha 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 ha. Right? But we would still jump to the conclusion that it's pencil and then only look back afterwards and say, oh wait, no, it turns out that wasn't right. That's the idea of a more bottom-up process because you're doing this feature matching, and yet you're still doing some top-down. So again, they always go hand in hand. On the next slide, I'm going to show you a phrase, and I want everybody to read it out loud. You're going to feel like a doofus, but hey, everybody else in here is going to feel like a doofus too. So actually do this. Say out loud what you read. Okay? Everybody on board? All right. Here we go. Oh, ha ha ha. You're so excited. No, okay, just kidding. Here is the actual thing that I want you to read out loud. Take another look at it. Read it very carefully. Read it again. Oh, right. I love Paris in the springtime. How many people did not notice the second the first time through? Most of us don't. And how many people have seen this before? Yeah, okay. So you people, you know, you're so smart. But for the rest of us, we don't notice the second the. We sense it. Your eyes saccaded, your eyes noticed, they skipped, they looked briefly at that second the. The information went into your brain, but you did not perceive it. You did not perceive it because you did not expect it. Think back from 2 chapters ago when we were talking about consciousness and this idea of selective attention. Right? So, for instance, there was the example of the guy giving directions to some, the person saying, hey, can you give me directions to this church? And somebody comes through with a big screen and walks through and interrupts them and is replaced by a new person. They sensed the difference between the original person they were talking to and the new person they were talking to, but they did not perceive the difference. Their body picked up on the difference, but they didn't notice it because they didn't focus attention on what was going on there. The same basic process is here, right? So our top-down processes, those sort of holistic ways of looking at the world, say, well, I know in English you never have 2 consecutive thes, therefore I'm going to just ignore this one. You're sensing the second word the, but you are not perceiving it. So that's basically what we're talking about in terms of this sensation versus perception framework. So we're going to start by talking about, let me check my time. We're going to start by talking about some ways that we have of organizing the world around us. This Gestalt theory, principles of perceptual organization. Gestalt psychology is a school of thought that goes way back to the 1920s, 30s, 40s, that was really groundbreaking in terms of thinking about the ways that people understand their world in a pragmatic sense. From a neuropsychology perspective, right, They may be more interested in the sensation side of things. And Gestalt psychologists were much more interested in the perceptual side of things. How do people understand the world around us? Not just how do we see the world around us, but how do we understand it? So the Gestalt psychology perspective is basically the whole is more than the sum of its parts. Have you heard that phrase before? Yeah, so the whole is more than the sum of its parts. That's what all of this boils down to. If you were to glance at this picture and I were to just show it to you for a very brief flash, what do you think you would say it was a picture of? Yeah, a face, a man. And in fact, if you watched the Scientific American Frontiers video in your recitations last week, you saw the man with the split brain go and do a task similar to this, where he looks at this face or a similar face, and he's like, well, is it made out of vegetables or is it a face? What is he perceiving? He's sensing the same thing, but is he perceiving a face or is he perceiving vegetables? So we're going to talk about some different perceptual principles and how Gestalt psychologists say, okay, here's how we organize a really complex world around us. So the first Gestalt principle is called proximity. The basic idea is that we group stuff based on what it's next to. When things are physically close together, we assume they are parts of a group. We tend to form items that are close together into perceptual groups. Believe it or not, the same number of rectangles in the left and the right are black versus white. But the one on the left has meaning to us. The one on the right doesn't. It's not even a QR code or anything. It's just black and white squares. Right? So we say, well, these squares are all close together. I'm going to assume that they are a group. I'll try to give real-life examples of this for each of these Gestalt principles because they can be very abstract. When I was in graduate school, I used to ride the bus all the time to and from, my house to school because, well, I was poor. P.S. If you didn't know, StarTran is updating its bus routes. Anybody who takes the bus, you should know this, but if you don't, be aware. StarTran is updating its routes starting in November. They're changing their route system. So if you live off campus and you take the bus to get to school, be aware because it's going to change sometimes very drastically. So be aware of that. Also, they're going to be giving rides for free, I think, all of October and all of November. So if you have not used the bus system here in town and you would like to try it, it will be free. Yay! My kids are super excited about the bus. I don't know why. I have a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old, and they're like, Mom, can we ride the bus? I'm like, sure. Woo! But they get really excited about it. So anyway, it's one of those things where the more people ride it, the more likely we are to actually continue to have a bus system. So please use it as you see fit. Okay, back to my example. When I was in graduate school, I used to ride the bus a lot. And so toward the end of the day, I would, get on the bus at, say, 5:45, and I'd start riding home. And a lot of the time, there would be this group of people all sitting together at the back of the bus. There'd be 4 or 5 people at the back, and the rest of the bus would be empty. So I always assumed, well, there's that group of people riding home together. And it always, I don't know how many times this happened, but it always threw me for a loop when they just wouldn't talk. They actually were just strangers who happened to all be sitting close together. And then one would ring the bell and get off, and then, 8 blocks later, somebody else would ring the bell and get off, and then 10 blocks after that, somebody else would ring the bell and get off. Right, so what happened was I was grouping them because they were physically close together, and I assumed they were friends or colleagues or something, when in fact they weren't. So that's the basic idea of proximity. Something close together, things that are close together are assumed to be a group. Number 2 is the idea of similarity. Don't go to Target wearing a red shirt and khakis. Don't go to Walmart wearing a blue shirt. like a bright blue shirt and khakis. Because people will think you work there. They will come up to you and they say, hey, can you tell me where the shampoo is? And I'm like, dude, not working here. In fact, the other day I was at Hy-Vee and I was buying some cilantro or something. And this lady came up to me and she's like, can you tell me where the ginger is? And I'm like, I'm wearing jeans and a t-shirt. Like, why do you think I work here? And I'm like, it's over there. Because I had just bought some ginger, so it was weird. But I was like, I have no idea why you think I work here. I'm not dressed. Because at Hy-Vee they wear dress shirts and a tie. I was like, I don't know why you think I work here. It's weird. Anyway, similarity is when we assume that something that is physically similar to other objects is a member of that group. So somebody saying that somebody asking you if you know where the X is at a store because you're dressed like employees. There's a story that came up and there was a news story that came up and hit social media a few weeks ago. It was this narrative written by a white woman who had been on the subway, and she was on the subway, and across from her was a young black man, and they were just sitting there minding their own business. And then a group of rowdy kids, who also happened to be black, got on the train. And so they were making all this ruckus, and so somebody complained to the conductor, and the conductor stopped the train and called in a security guard, or like a police officer, to escort these rowdy teenagers off the train. So the police officer comes on the train, and he says, all right, get off the train. And this group of 4 or 5 teenagers gets off, and he goes up to this other boy, this young black man who's sitting there, and he says, come on, you get off too. You're one of them. And he's like, no, I'm not. I don't know those people. I'm just sitting here minding my own business. And the cop didn't believe him. So what happened eventually was that the young woman who was writing this essay had to step in and say, he's not. He was on the train with me. He's not hanging out with these people. He doesn't know them. Leave him alone. And that's finally what made the cop believe that he was not, in fact, one of them. So lest you think that these things are completely abstract, they actually do have real-world consequences, right? If we say they are all members of Group X, whatever they is and whatever Group X is, we are engaging in this principle of similarity. We're saying you all, whoever you all are, look alike, so I'm going to lump you in together. That's the principle of similarity. A third principle is closure. This is a little more lighthearted than the last one. Closure is our tendency to perceive a complete form. Tendency to perceive a complete form and ignore gaps in the border. So when you glance at this, you see a baby with a giant butt. There are also some more risque examples of this that I will not show in class. One way in which I experience closure, so if you ever watch shows that have a set, right? I mean, most shows do nowadays. So for instance, one of my favorite shows is Game of Thrones, and I'm rewatching it in preparation for the next season. So you have to start months in advance to start getting up to where you are. And so, at some level of consciousness, I know that these are sets. I know that the throne room, the Game of Thrones throne room is not a real legitimate place, and it actually has 3 sides, and it doesn't have a ceiling. But somehow, when I see photographs of this set of my favorite shows, it always messes with my brain. Do you experience this? You're like, that's not what it's like. Oh, wait, that actually is what it's like. That's so weird. What's happening is that you believe there is a complete room there because you're so immersed in the spirit of this place. And yet, it's not actually like that. Speaking of rooms and favorite shows, how many people in here are Stranger Things fans? Okay. I will tell you some more about this when it comes closer, but I'm super excited. My husband and I are creating, for everybody who's not into Stranger Things, tune out for 90 seconds. For everybody else, listen up, because this is really exciting. So you know that scene in the living room where Winona Ryder's character paints the letters on the wall, and then there's the like flashing lights to spell out stuff. Okay, we're recreating that at my house for Halloween, and my husband is a computer programmer, so he has this string of programmable lights, and he set it up so that you can text a message to this phone number, and it will actually make the lights say whatever you want it to. And it's going to be like we're getting it. I'm so excited. It's really super cool. So anyway, I'll tell you when that is up, and then you can actually text stuff, and it'll send a message to the upside down for you. So it's pretty cool. Okay, now everybody can tune back in. I'm just so excited. That's what I do in my spare time, is like geek projects like that. Okay, so that's the basic idea. Another aspect of Gestalt psychology is the idea, this is really, really important actually, foundational to the idea of Gestalt psychology, the figure versus the ground, figure-ground relationships. Basically, the figure is the thing that you're paying attention to. The ground is everything else. The figure is the thing you're paying attention to. The ground is everything else. So again, if you think about selective attention, the thing that you are paying attention to, yep, from a Gestalt perspective, we call that the figure. All the other stuff that's going on, the stuff you are not attending to, even if it's, creating sensory experiences in your brain, that other stuff is all the ground. So a solo is standing up in front of the rest of the orchestra, that would be a figure-ground relationship. Paying attention to the map that this person is showing you and not noticing that the person themselves has changed, that would be another example. The map is the figure, the person, as bizarre as that might seem, is actually the ground in this case. One thing that's kind of fun about studying sensation and perception is we can do all sorts of tricks. So we talked about inattentional blindness. Yeah, I already talked about that. Because that figure-ground relationship is sometimes ambiguous, right? Like right now I'm looking at the map, but the moment I turn my head and look at this person who's interacting with me, they become the figure, right? So this relationship between the figure and the ground is dynamic and ever-changing. What that means is that we can play with that and have little fun little perceptual tasks. So one very famous example of figure-ground relationships is the faces-vases illusion. So when you glance at this, how many people immediately see the faces? How many people immediately see the vase? So it's about 50-50. There's no right answer because they are both correct. How many people are able to make it switch between the faces and the vase? Yeah, okay, so this one's pretty easy. Here's another example. Right? So sometimes when you look at it, the young woman is the figure. Other times the skull is the figure and the woman is the ground. These pictures, this is called the death of vanity. These were really popular at the turn of the previous century to remind people not to be too vain. So it was all of these pictures of young, beautiful women sitting at their powdering tables and trying to look so beautiful, overlaid with images of death. I don't know, it's kind of dark, it's kind of twisted. But it was apparently a helpful reminder for them. How many people see the arrow in the FedEx sign? How many people have never noticed the arrow in the FedEx sign before? Yeah, I love that. Oh, there's this great chorus. The arrow, before you saw this, right, the FedEx sign was the figure and the arrow is the ground. You didn't even notice it. But once your attention is drawn to it, then all of a sudden the arrow becomes the figure and the rest of the FedEx sign becomes the ground. Now, every time you see a FedEx truck, you can look for this arrow because it's always going to be there until they redo their logo or something. So that's always kind of fun, finding little hidden things. So that's the idea of the figure-ground reversibility or the figure-ground relationship. Let's see how we're doing. So all of the stuff that we've talked about so far is pretty much visual in nature. It doesn't have to be, though. If you think about, for instance, figure-ground relationships, it could very well be that we're talking about auditory information instead. For instance, when you're at a party, or if you're sitting in class, there's probably one thing you're paying attention to, the conversation you're having with this other person, or listening to your professor talk to you, or whatever. But there are probably also other background sounds. You're just tuning them out. The same thing is true of touch. Okay, so right now, until I said something, you probably were not thinking about the pressure of the chair on your back and your legs. Now you're thinking about it, right? Maybe before you were thinking about, oh man, my hand kind of hurts from writing so much. That was the figure, and then the pressure of the chair on your back and legs was the ground. But now it has changed. Right, so these principles are not just related to vision, although they tend to be most studied within the visual realm because that's easier to study, frankly. So we're going to talk about vision in particular. We're going to delve into that sense. Again, we're mostly going to look at the perceptual side of vision rather than the sensory side of vision, so make sure that you read carefully the section in your book that describes those sensory processes. So we're mostly going to talk about those top-down phenomena. Top-down processes, a couple of different ways that it influences visual perception. There is more than this, but this is sort of a taster for you. We're going to talk about how we perceive motion. We're going to talk about how we do pattern recognition and then depth perception. Now, we're not going to get to all this today, but that's where we're going. I want to show you a really cool video, although if anybody has epilepsy or otherwise a seizure disorder and would like to look away. But I want to show you this cool demonstration that has what are called motion after effects. All the instructions are in the video, so just read the instructions and watch the video. Hopefully it'll work.
This video may cause temporary hallucinogenic events, but please do not be afraid. These effects usually last a few seconds. Read aloud every letter shown in the screen center. Do not make any mistake. Look away now.
It's doing it for me too. Okay, it should now be starting to dissipate for you all. Isn't that fun? This idea of motion after effects, it was originally called the waterfall illusion after a Scottish, what was his job? A Scottish dude, a writer, an author, visited a waterfall and he noticed, he was staring at it, just observing the beauty, and he looked away from the waterfall after he'd been staring at it for a minute or so. And he looks away and he's like, whoa, everything looks like it's moving upward. Have you ever played Dance Dance Revolution or Guitar Hero or something like that that's constantly scrolling? Have you had this experience playing that game? After you play it for a while and you look away, the real world looks like it's moving in the opposite direction? Yeah, it's super weird. Similar things happen with, like, if you're running on a treadmill for a long time and then you get off, it feels really strange for a few moments. Right? So be careful getting off of your treadmill. Again, these processes are not just visual in nature. A lot of these things transcend. But basically what's going on is there are particular neurons in your brain that are sensitive to particular types of movement. So what happens is those neurons, they fire while you're looking at this thing, and then they get tired. So they stop firing. What happens then is after the visual image disappears, whether you look away from the waterfall or the screen turns off or whatever, the opposite neurons are now firing, making it look like it's, like everything is moving down instead of moving up, if you're talking about Guitar Hero or DDR or whatever. With the case of this example we did, looking at the back of your hand, it's the same basic process, right? You have some cells that are particularly attuned to a particular movement. They get tired after being used very strongly for a minute. They stop working, and so the opposite ones are doing it. That's what makes your hand look like it's crawling. But it stops very quickly, right? Within about 30 seconds, just about everybody's visual perceptual processes go back to normal. The reason is the chemical that causes that perceptual process then gets replenished, and it stops the thing from continuing. But it's kind of cool, right? It's kind of crazy. So sometimes we perceive motion where there really isn't, right? Like staring at a stationary object after playing Dance Dance Revolution or looking at a waterfall. Another way in which we perceive movement is it's a phenomenon called illusion of movement. Yep. And you can usually do this with certain visual tasks and mind benders, and I'll show you a couple in just a moment here. But I'll tell you ahead of time how the illusion works. Basically, take a moment for me and look around the room, like sort of look forward, keep your head stationary, but look around the room. And notice what your eyes do. What do your eyes do? Do they move smoothly from spot to spot? Okay, what do they do instead? Yeah, they jump. That's called a saccade. Our eyes almost constantly do this. In fact, it is sometimes hard for us to move our eyes very smoothly from one spot to the next. Instead, what we do is our eyes hop from location to location, and our brain fills in the blur. That's this idea of motion blur that I've written up on the board. Our eyes hop from spot to spot, and our brains create the illusion of a blurred image moving from spot A to spot B. We can use that phenomenon that our eyes are constantly saccading, constantly moving, to create an illusion of movement. So let's see if this one works. For some people it does, for some people it doesn't. Does it look to anybody like those circles are rotating? A few people. Okay, let me show you a strong... Yeah, that was kind of what happened the last time I showed a group of students this. Like, it works for a small number of people. This one usually works, though. Does that work? As you look around, let your eyes kind of relax and move around and look at the picture. Oh, yeah, it's totally doing it for me. It's freaking me out. It kind of looks like this image is sort of... It's going blah, 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 blah. I make sound effects in my head. I don't know. It just seems like it's making sound effects at me. But it looks like the image is sort of shifting and moving and bouncing out at you. But I promise you, this is in fact a stationary image and not a video file or something that I've embedded. This is in fact a stationary image. And yet we perceive motion where there is none. If this is not working for you, I suggest going online at some point after class, not right now. Go online some point after class and type in illusion of movement, and you'll get a whole bunch of different examples. Some of them are more vivid than others, so you kind of just have to look until you find one that works for you. So that's the basic idea. Again, we are not actually perceiving movement, but we think we are. This is a top-down process. Okay, way number 2 that we use top-down processing in visual information is pattern recognition. We are really good pattern recognizers. In fact, that is one thing that sets humans apart from other lower animals. We are really good at recognizing patterns. And in many ways, humans are better at recognizing patterns than computers. Computers are getting better at it in certain domains, but we tend to be a lot better still. Things like speech recognition. right? Your phones are really powerful. They are really smart at certain tasks. But why in God's name can I not ask my phone to do a simple task and have it actually work? Or like I'll say, call mom, and it'll say, calling Bob. No. And I'll like say, like, Siri, come on. I get very mad at Siri. I'm working on that. I do get very mad at Siri for not doing this. Like, any human could understand what I'm asking you to do. Why can't you? So we are really, really good at perceiving patterns. Even when visual information is missing, our brains are really good at filling in the gaps and deciding what the thing is. And furthermore, once you see a pattern, it's really hard not to see it. Sort of like the FedEx example. Right? Once you see that arrow in the FedEx sign, it's going to be hard not to notice it in the future. Take a look at this picture and see if you can identify what it is. If you can, just write it down on your notes. You don't have to shout it out. How many people are like, I have no clue what that is. It looks like a bunch of splotches. That's cool. Yeah, that's what happens for most people. How many people do see what it is? Okay, what is it? Yeah, it's a dog. It's a Dalmatian. I'll outline the dog in green. So there it is. And then over here is the base of a tree, right? So there's a shady area and a tree trunk. So there's our dog. Let me go back to the previous picture. How many people can still see the dog? Right, even if it's not outlined in green, once you see the dog, it's hard not to see it. That's the idea of pattern recognition. Once you recognize a pattern, you keep seeing it over and over. Here's another example. What is this? Yeah. Right? All you need is a little bit of a change in context. Right? Before, after. Moo. Right? So that's what it is. The thing is, though, because we are so good at pattern recognition, sometimes we perceive patterns where there are no patterns. We want to make sense of what's going on around us. And so sometimes we impose a pattern on something where there is none. For instance, how many people read Madeline when they were little? The story about Madeline, the little French girl. Yeah. So there's this scene where she's laying in bed in the hospital after her appendectomy, and she's looking up at the ceiling, and she talks about this crack on the ceiling that had a habit of sometimes looking like a rabbit. So she's perceiving this rabbit form in something that's just a random crack on the ceiling. I remember I used to have a crack in the ceiling above my bed, and so I would always have this little face. You know, I perceived a face in the cracks. Faces are particularly well recognized. That seems to be something that we are biologically programmed to do, to be really, really good at noticing faces. But again, sometimes that means that we do that when there really is not anything there. In our last couple minutes of class, I do have a couple of iClicker questions to close us out. Set your clicker to AD. Yep. There we go. So here's your iClicker number 1. Once we have formed a wrong idea about reality, we have more difficulty seeing the truth. Once we've formed a wrong idea about reality, we have more difficulty seeing the truth. This best illustrates the impact of A, relative clarity, B, the phi phenomenon, C, top-down processing, or D, visual capture. So take a moment here to answer the question. We still have some people clicking in. Okay, I'll give you 3 more seconds to click in your answer if you have not already. 3, 2, 1, stop. C is the correct answer, top-down processing. There we go. All right, so good. If you have questions about this or if you are unclear, let me know, let your RESI instructor know, read the chapter in the book or reread it if you have already looked at it. I will leave it there for today, and we will talk about depth perception and then hearing and do some pretty cool demos in class next time. Thank you very much. Have a good couple of days.